have a tool there to save people in the developing world and the third world to allow them to build upward mobility. It's Bitcoin. So please embrace it and reach out to people in developing countries and help them absorb it, because that's going to change their lives. Everybody in politics knows the most powerful voting bloc is the single issue voter. Something that everybody could say, okay, it's enough, we got to stop. And it was great that Bitcoin was a part of it. I think it was a perfectly natural fit. And I think the lobby class understood that the Overton window had shifted to the point where it now included this new asset that they didn't understand. All of these factors cumulatively have driven the investor class to say, hey, Larry, do you have Bitcoin? Because if you don't have Bitcoin, I'm going to go to an investment house that does. Because look at all these years of gains that I've lost out on because we are stubborn. I didn't realize your uncle was Peter Schiff.
Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you so much for coming on, Benjamin.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to speak to fellow Bitcoiners.
Really, really cool. Maybe for the few people that aren't aware of you, what you've done in the past from the Freedom Convoy, but all the other things that you're also doing, maybe give them some background of what you're doing and who you are, and especially why you're excited about Bitcoin.
Yeah, I guess most people in the Bitcoin space know me because of this event, the Canadian Trucker Convoy, which I believe was instrumental in helping draw attention to Bitcoin on the global stage, because it was the first time where that hyperbolic scenario that we would all say, when the government became tyrannical, but many of us never really believed that would happen in the West, let alone countries like Canada. But as you'll learn the story here, that's exactly what happened. And Bitcoin is really, it's the only money that was not frozen and captured by the government. It's the only money that was distributed to the truckers. Of all the cumulatively approximately $25 million that was raised for the truckers during those 3 weeks, only Bitcoin was distributed directly to the truckers, thanks to Caribou and a couple of people on the ground. And that's what made all the difference. So I hope, I wrote this book with the idea and the hopes that people will look about the way they'll look at in the future, in the next 10 to 20 years afterwards. I think, when people become nostalgic for the past, that's really what it's written for. So people, as Bitcoin swallows more and more of the economy, they can look back at one of the many origin stories of Bitcoin. And I think that's one of the things that really changed the perception of Bitcoin, especially amongst the normies. At Bitcoin was it 22 or 23? I think it was 20. I don't remember, one of those years. The first year that Robert F. Kennedy was there, he was on stage, and what did he say? He said it was when he saw what happened to the truckers that's what made him realize and understand that we need a separation from money and state in terms of money that the government cannot control. And so it was that moment, because this protest was all over the world. We had copycat protests, I guess you might call them, in almost 40 countries where people were fed up with exactly the same thing. So that's how most people know of me. And they didn't know that prior to the trucker convoy, I had gotten involved in politics because I was a small business owner in Toronto, and it was on a university campus. So I saw the switch in culture, like somebody turned on the postmodern switch, and we went from being, individualistic or more individualistic to entirely collectivist in our philosophical framing of the world. And things just progressed over the years that I was on the business. I had the business there, and even our local politicians started regurgitating the same nonsensical rhetoric. And so, like all, entrepreneurial people who might be a little bit more on the creative side, I just thought, hey, why don't I just run for politics and make them look as silly as they are? And I did have some success with that. So that's kind of what, one thing has led to another. And it just became from, hey, just a regular small business guy, got fed up with the political class, got involved in politics, ended up running federally. So met lots of people, understood how the gears of the machine fit together behind the scenes in a way that a lot of people don't really understand. And I'm trying to communicate that to Bitcoiners, to how things actually work. And the next thing I know, I'm in this protest that went global that I never in a million years would have imagined that I would be a part of or even participate in. Like small business, more economically minded people, like we don't protest. But it just got so ridiculous to the point that there needed to be some sort of pushback that everybody, whether you're left or right or up or down or objectivist or libertarian, something that everybody could say, okay, it's enough, we got to stop. And it was great that Bitcoin was a part of it. I think it was a perfectly natural fit between the philosophy of Bitcoin and the philosophy of what we were trying to accomplish there.
It's interesting because a lot of Bitcoiners look at politics as something we don't need, and I highly disagree with that most of the time, because I think even though Bitcoin might be to a certain degree untouchable from politics because it's global, and like if one government shuts it down, another government might embrace it. But like I think we as individuals are still highly attached to politics and what politics actually does with us. How do you see the importance of getting involved in politics and making your own voice kind of heard in that the government, in that system that maybe we look very critical at?
Yeah, and full disclosure, I hate politics. I happen to be pretty good at it, apparently. The behind the scenes stuff. And if anybody wants to know how politics actually works, watch the TV show House of Cards. You cannot believe how real some of that is. Some of it. Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. I understand the frustration with Bitcoin doesn't care. I understand that. However, it was the Greek philosopher Parasides that said, just because you don't care about politics doesn't mean politics won't take an interest in you, or something to that effect. I might have jumbled the words. And that is important for us to understand. And, I talked about this at a recent Bitcoin conference where I was on one of the panels. And I try to communicate and explain to people that without getting too political, because it's not about politics, this is about individual sovereignty, safety, and building a life for ourselves. That was the lesson of World War II, and it was also the lesson of the Holocaust, that, the problem is people couldn't escape. It was a different world back then. If you had assets, those assets were easily seized and controlled, whereas if people, that's just one example of genocide. Maybe Rwanda is another one. There's many other ones. That if people understood the importance and the value that Bitcoin brings them, then we might have had many opportunities where people could have escaped that sort of extreme political situation. And yeah, maybe many of those people were not political and figured, what do I care about politics? Well, I think that's the big lesson for it. And I think we can do a lot on the communication front on that in the Bitcoin space. And that's why it is important. Again, I don't like politics, but, we're involved in, I'll use some hyperbolic language, but we're involved in this war with a system. Okay, so if you buy into that frame, then a war has multiple battlefronts. Sun Tzu is The Art of War is a perfect example of a book that will explain much of this and the importance of understanding your enemy and even, getting involved and understanding how to manipulate the enemy's system, which is what you're doing when you're getting involved politically.
And it's dealing with reality. If we leave governments with all the people that just only want to do governments and we're kind of getting out of it, it probably gets worse than better.
Yeah, exactly. I was having this conversation with somebody in Florida last week. that what kind of people go into government? It's not, entrepreneurs, developers, creators. There are some rare exceptions, there's no question, but in general, having known and still know many elected officials, or the majority of politicians who are never elected, who are just work behind the scenes as staffers and EAs and consultants and whatever, and lobbyists, you're not getting our best. You're not getting our most creative. We're kind of getting, I don't want to say bottom of the barrel, but we're getting people who have different incentive structures and motivations, usually around ego, sometimes all ideology. Do you know what RICE is? The acronym RICE?
Right, no.
So the RICE is an acronym that tries to describe human motivation, the 4 pillars of human motivation, and they are RICE, which is rewards, ideology, coercion, or ego. Well, so when you look at people in the political space versus people in the entrepreneurial or business space, the motivation systems are usually entirely different. We get this idea that people in politics just want to control everything. It's the opposite. They are cowards. They don't want to be on the front page of the newspaper of a scandal. But it's often ego first, which is the lesson from House of Cards, sometimes reward, that's secondary, or sometimes ideology. So if you understand the motivations of the people that are involved, you can kind of work within the system a little bit better. So they are incentivized entirely differently than Bitcoiners are, right? So, which is why I think we struggle to get Bitcoiners involved in politics, minus a few cases, but most people are like, who cares? It doesn't matter for me. So yeah, I agree that is not the path forward.
What do you think is the impact that Bitcoin will have on politics? I think a lot about that exit valve. Like once we have somewhere where we can go towards, same with the trucker convoy, like what if Bitcoin wasn't there, then it would be a whole different story. But if we have an exit valve, an escape hatch where we can go, this naturally makes the other system also act differently, because if we make a lot of shit, people will just go to the alternative system.
Yeah, I think that's already in play. Like I never would have imagined that, the president of the United States, whether you like him or hate him is not the point, but would be shilling Bitcoin, right? And shilling Bitcoin to the world. And remember how defiant he was about Bitcoin initially, how much he loved the US dollar and the dollar is king. And now he's completely flipped. And it's amazing what happens when people get their bank accounts frozen or seized, which is what happened to him and many members of his family. A few years after, it happened to us when we got all our accounts and assets seized by the government. When we were there in Ottawa, when our accounts were frozen, I was with a friend of mine. We had to, towards the end, had to get out of the red zone. So I went to stay with a friend of mine in a particular area of Ottawa, it's an elderly community. It's basically Florida in the outskirts of Ottawa. And she went to the bank and saw a friend of hers that she knows who works at the bank. And they were just talking, and she said, yeah, it's crazy what's going on. And her friend said, you don't know the half of it. She said, every day we have a lineup of people, and the bank was quite busy, which is what prompted the conversation. She said, every day we have a lineup of senior citizens coming in to try to withdraw their maximum amount that they can withdraw for the day. Because they may not be political, but they don't know what's going on. They just know that the government is seizing bank accounts, and they're just, give me all my money. They'll put it under their mattress. And that is an untold story that nobody in the financial system and nobody in the government or in the legacy media will tell anybody, that in this case in Canada, we had a $1.2 to $1.4 trillion bank run during that period. And that is why Justin Trudeau's own former Liberal, now independent senators in the Senate wouldn't back him to extend what we had was essentially martial law, because he was collapsing the economy in real time. So all these things cumulatively, and the suspicion for government, which is I think very healthy, has caused people to say, okay, we need some sort of insurance policy. And the best insurance policy that worked during that period was Bitcoin. And now you have the President of the United States and many politicians in the United States now promoting it. Who thought we would be here? Like, you always think, yeah, individual people will just realize what Bitcoin is, they'll buy it, and they'll want to start using it. Well, we're going in the complete opposite way. Where, the most powerful political office in the United States is trying to encourage everybody top down to get involved in Bitcoin, and I think that's very healthy.
Yeah, it surprised me too, because when I got into Bitcoin in around 2020, my theory was governments will buy Bitcoin, central banks will buy Bitcoin, but the very small ones, those who are dependent on the US dollar, those who want to break free from another fiat system, those will be the first one. And yeah, El Salvador came, but it's also like a story with two sides, how much they are actually in Bitcoin or not. Yeah. Now having the president of the United States of America being on a Bitcoin conference and shilling Bitcoin to the world, no matter what you think, how much he actually understands Bitcoin or like what's his intentions with it is, the pure fact that he pays attention to that niche community speaks volume to me. And I was not like, this was not on my bingo card. This was not on my radar.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's going to be more of this to come in the future, because you know what it does? It allows, and not only that, but also, I know a lot of people in the Bitcoin space are very upset, or maybe vocal on, institutions like BlackRock, developing tools for Bitcoin and bringing it to their client base. And my argument is, remember, Bitcoin is for everybody. That whole thing that we talked about for many, many years, that Bitcoin is for everyone. And what it's done is, for the boomers, that whole class of people now, that whole demographic, it lends itself to credibility that the institutions that they have trusted with their pension funds that they know nothing about is now offering a product in Bitcoin. So that has opened the door for me to talk more seriously about Bitcoin, and then shifting from being completely dismissive to, it's just, internet money or video game money, to switching to, okay, yeah, it's another asset class. I don't really understand it, but at least now they're primed to have the conversation. And I think that it's important to understand that just because you don't like somebody who is a proponent of Bitcoin doesn't mean it can't be part of the conversation that you use to reach people who were previously not understanding.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are just, and I don't share that concern, but a lot of people are concerned that if they're coming in, they're doing weird things with Bitcoin and kind of getting in under their control, similar what kind of happened with gold. And I don't think that will ever happen with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is a digital asset, so you can verify it easily and you can do a lot more things than you can do with gold. But there is some concerns that those institutions kind of, Satoshi Nakamoto in the beginning with, how was it called, the WikiLeaks, he was cautious with like, do we want that big of attention that early on? And then granted now Bitcoin is way bigger already and way more robust. But there's some concerns saying like, do we want BlackRock and huge institutions already in Bitcoin? I say yes. I think Bitcoin is here to stay and should be tested. But there's like some concern of like, what is their intention? They just want to make money with fees, or do they want to have something else also?
Yeah, and listen, of course they want to make money with fees, because I don't think they just decided on their own, okay, I like Bitcoin. There became an organic demand that we helped drive. And we helped drive by drawing attention to it. And that, it was, I think it was, who was it who said that the chief marketing officer for Bitcoin was Justin Trudeau when he froze all our bank accounts, right? So all of these factors cumulatively have driven the investor class to say, hey, Larry, do you have Bitcoin? Because if you don't have Bitcoin, I'm going to go to an investment house that does. Because look at all these years of gains that I've lost out on because we are stubborn. And the whole principle of being a wise investor is to be open to every possible opportunity. So I think the fact that it was organically driven is another untold story that I think we'll learn more about in the future.
And the flip side, I think you mentioned it before, is also I literally got 2 days ago a call from an uncle of mine who was always against Bitcoin, and now all of a sudden he's like, "Hey, I want to get into Bitcoin," and I was like, "Oh, why? You are always so against it?" He's like, "My bank advisor is now into Bitcoin, and now I'm getting fear of missing out." And I'm like, "Oh," it's like he needed that kind of permission, like seeing someone that he trusted with money getting into Bitcoin, and that's where I'm like, I think BlackRock and those can orange peel a lot of blabs and normies that we want to have. And it's not just like institutions and bigger money companies that they come into the game because of that.
I didn't realize your uncle was Peter Schiff. How funny was that when he showed up at the conference? You must have, I was on the floor laughing.
Yeah, and his talks were one of the most well-intended talks ever.
Exactly. But, it's kind of a turn. And I think this is what Bitcoiners sometimes get frustrated by. And I get it and I understand. But there's not one statement you can make, one example you can make, or one conversation you can make. It's, regular turns of the ratchet through time to get people to see our framing of the world. And that is a difficult endeavor to get people to distort their framing of the world and understand how you see things. But if you're good at that, over time, you'll be able to bring over just about everybody, which is what I try to do.
What are your thoughts on why Trump came into Bitcoin and what does this mean for Bitcoin?
I said this in a number of spaces leading up to that because you could see it happening, and maybe this comes from my experience in politics and running for office, and you understand the mechanics of message testing and how they ID voters, which is very key to modern politics to make elections more efficient, or at least more cost effective. I think what was happening was there became a buzz. There had been a buzz that had been growing for some time. The trucker convoy was very political, and it was Western and political. It was kind of that intersection of all of these things that we were discussing. And I think the lobby class understood that the Overton window had shifted to the point where it now included this new asset that they didn't understand, but that there was some global movement around it, meaning there is a voter base that they can exploit. I don't say exploit in a negative way. I'm saying in the political term. There is a voter base that they can exploit and get people on side. And what was interesting, you could see the right wing was better. By the way, I don't like right or left wings, but I don't like that framing, but we'll use it just for argument's sake. The right wing of the political structure, the Republican wing of the political structure, they seem to understand it. But the other side was trying to understand where that voting base was. And they all struggled because one of the biggest advantages of Bitcoin for me has been you have everybody from across the political spectrum or people who just don't care about politics, as we discussed previously. So it's allowed many of us to interact with each other after a decade of us, pushing ourselves into these silos and echo chambers, that now finally through Bitcoin, we could have conversations with people we disagree with and say, yeah, okay, we disagree on ABC, but I agree on Bitcoin and freedom and basic principles and whatever. So that becomes a challenge for the political class to identify, is this new movement, is that voting block going to be more on one side of the political spectrum or on the other side of the political spectrum. And what they didn't understand is for all sides, which is what I've been trying to communicate to people within the political class. The other thing is, it's really interesting. I've always been very, very critical of more, and conservatism in Europe and North America is different, and Canada is somewhere in between the U.S. and Europe. But I've been, for many, many years, telling them they need to stop trying to motivate. Remember those 4 pillars of motivation. Motivating voter bases around from a spreadsheet. They're good with economic policy. Whether they actually follow through with it is a different story. But their messaging around cuts and sound economic principles, that doesn't resonate with 95% of the population. You need something aspirational. That's what the other side is very good at doing, painting a future. At least they used to be. They used to be good at painting a picture of the world of being a more positive future that we can go to. Now, here we are, where we have something that is in the wheelhouse of more conservative-minded people because it's financial, it's economic. Like, that's supposed to be your area of expertise. So it's both financial and economic, and it's aspirational. It paints a brighter future for everybody. It enforces freedom. So they would be ridiculous to not go after the one aspirational endeavor in their wheelhouse of politics that has emerged over the past, I don't know how many decades. If they don't capture it and embrace it and understand how to integrate it into their policy structure, then they deserve to lose every election forever, because people they're not electing you to yes, they're electing for cuts, and I get on the conservative side, but people broadly, they want their lives to be secure and have more opportunities in the future. And Bitcoin was the best communicator for it if you knew how to communicate around Bitcoin.
That makes a whole lot of sense. And it's also interesting how you mentioned that Bitcoin is kind of on both spectrums, because I have friends in Bitcoin that are further on the left than me, and friends that are further on the right than me. Like it's on both spectrums. I have friends in Bitcoin, and we had even like what's it called? Bitcoin for Harris or something like that. So like we even had with Kamala Harris some kind of small movement that was definitely not as loud as the Bitcoin movement for Trump, but we had something going on. Maybe it was called Crypto for Harris. Maybe it was not specific to Bitcoin. I'm not sure about that, but there's on both sides, there are definitely people in Bitcoin. And every time I made with the guy from either Bitcoin or Crypto for Harris an interview, and I made a lot of interviews with people from the Trump side. And when I had someone from the Harris team on, the Trump people were like, oh, how can you be a Bitcoiner if you're a Democrat? And then when I had the other side on, Democrats were like, how can you be a Bitcoiner when you're for Trump? Like it's really weird how this thing, we connected to values that we have and mirrored on Bitcoin, even though Bitcoin does not have a political mindset, or like doesn't prefer any candidates or anything like that. So in a weird way, it's a really great unifier, because it's neutral. Exactly. It just is.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with people on really the extreme opposite end of politics. And I remember one specific conversation. I said, listen, I like you, but boy, you couldn't be more different than I in terms of my political worldview. So how do we communicate to your people? What can I do to help you? Or what strategies can we can think of to work together to get your people on board? Because my people are already on that journey. I can tell you what's worked for us. Tell me what you think can work for you, and if there's something we can do on our end to help you orange pill your people. That is the epitome of unity, finding that base layer that we're all together on. And I love those conversations. I really do.
Do you think we should, as Bitcoiners, get more active in politics?
I don't know. I think maybe to a degree, maybe focusing on Bitcoin itself. But it's like we've shifted to how things were culturally in the past, where, you'd go, I remember my parents would have dinner with their friends, for example, and the two topics of conversation that nobody would ever discuss, other than like a quick comment here and there, would be politics and religion, right? Because those are people's personal things. They come up to a worldview, and when you try to influence and change people, that can get to a very heated discussion. So I feel like if it's focused on Bitcoin and freedom and free speech and allowing us all to protect those freedoms in the future, great. When it comes down to like granular policies and stuff, I'm not so sure. And maybe that's because I've seen how it works behind the scenes. I understand the mechanisms and incentives and how voter blocks are manipulated, whereas the average person doesn't. And I try to talk a little bit about that in politics to tell people what you see is not reality. That's not what's actually happening behind the scenes. So why are you arguing about that? And so I think if we just keep it more singularly focused or focused on the area of Bitcoin and freedom, and like, listen, you have your political position. You want to have a conversation one-on-one is a different story. But in terms of being politically active, probably not, because everybody in politics knows the most powerful voting bloc is the single issue voter, because they're impossible to sway if you drop or you try to negotiate on their one issue. So that's why they always have a slate of policies, because if you have something that's so vital to your primary policy, let's say it's Bitcoin, and they say, well, we can talk about Bitcoin, but can't really put anything in writing right now. But here are 10 other policies to distract you that are easy, that we probably won't even do anyways, but we're going to say we're going to do it. Then you end up compromising beyond your principles, and it's not your fault. It's just kind of that's the structure of how they message in politics. But if you are a hard ass on just Bitcoin and Bitcoin only, don't distract me with all the other stuff that I don't really know or care about because I'm not in politics, then I think we would be much stronger. So I dip into a whole bunch of other areas of politics. That's because there's other personal concerns for me, things I witnessed on the university campuses with my business, and certain files that I just became very informed on. So I'll talk about the few things that I really know politically behind the scenes, because I've seen things that other people will not have seen.
I do love the watches from Coin Vigilante, but today I have a very special message, not from me, but from the CEO himself, Carlos from Coin Vigilante. Let's hear him.
To all the Robin Seyr podcast community, I'm Carlos Estrada from Coin Vigilante, and we're sponsors of the show, and we're going to give you a very special discount exclusive to you, 10% off your order at coinvigilante.com when you use Robin at checkout. We have really nice watches that you guys can buy right now for 10%. This is a transparency edition, beautiful watch. These watches are worn in over 55 countries and counting. This discount is just for you, exclusive to the Robin Seyr podcast. We have limited editions, we have limited productions. These watches come in very nice packaging, boxing material, and they are collector's item for Bitcoiners only. Enjoy the discount. Thanks for supporting the show and Coin Vigilante.
The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They're also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you You can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I finally and officially mine Bitcoin. This is not just something to stack more Satoshis, but it's most importantly also to support the network. Individual miners are the ones that keep the Bitcoin network decentralized. And by the way, you get KYC free Bitcoin. That's why I use simplemining. I get an actual proper Bitcoin miner. They set it up for me. They repair it if it breaks down. And most importantly, they let me choose the pool and even connect my own full node. I'm completely sovereign and I'm completely in control, and I can sign up with Ocean, no account needed. I just give them a Bitcoin address and then there's mining going on. No KYC, nothing. So if you're ready to mine Bitcoin, go to simplemining.io, tell them you come from Robin, and let's mine Bitcoin together. I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called Microseed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today. And you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. Again, that's microseed.io to get your last backup tool you ever need. Is there a single issue? Because I see a lot of Bitcoiners actually saying like, oh, whatever party is the one that I think is most beneficial for Bitcoin, I vote for. Like I see that in Bitcoin more than in many other communities. Is that the reason why maybe Donald Trump hurt them so early on? Because it's not only a loud group, it's also a group that's not really looking at anything else. So you kind of have to go to the Bitcoin conference. You cannot sway them with some economics or anything else.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it was, that they realized most political parties, what they struggle with is the people who are disengaged and don't vote. Like that's the big cherry they can go for. Because they like when people talk about I'm going to vote this way in my district, whatever, they already know how you're going to vote. Everything is mapped out through these actuarial tables. That's why they're knocking on doors. They're just knocking on doors as part of this GOTV voter ID strategy. So your individual vote really isn't going to sway things because they already know how you're going to vote. But if you have this whole swath of people that feel disenfranchised, that aren't motivated to vote, they don't get out, but there's only one issue that they care about, it'd be an idiot not to go after that, because just give them their one issue, and hey, that one issue actually aligns with all of our values. That's why I couldn't understand how people on the other side, let's say in the US, for example, on the Democratic side, couldn't see that. Like it's just one issue, and then you'd all be able to capture votes within that space. But I think it's at this point it's been solidified on, I call it, the centrist, maybe center right. I don't like that. The libertarian / conservative, freedom thinking, independent people that might be socially liberal, get out of my business, but I do want, hard conservative economic policies. I think that's the space that has really captured Bitcoin because there's the most obvious alignment. And listen, I could make the argument for Bitcoin for people on the total opposite end. Like if I went on their podcast and we just talked about their value system and certain ones that I don't agree with, but I can make the best arguments for them to sell it to their people, which is what they need to do. And that's what I love about Bitcoin. There's something for absolutely everyone. And I've said this, to people, trying to explain this to people on the more center right part of things. to say that it's powerful for the other side. And the perfect example of it is, and maybe I have this, framing because I've lived a lot of my life in the third world, that, half the world doesn't have access to a bank account. They're poor in certain Latin American countries because you're just not allowed to get a bank account. Try to get a bank account in Colombia or Ecuador. It's a nightmare if you live there just to get a bank account. Well, now here you go. You have both a currency and a bank account for the poorest people in certain civilization. Well, poorest people in the world, despite all the upward mobility of the past 2 decades. There's still a lot of towns where it's all pobres. All impoverished people. And the reason they are is because they can't accumulate any wealth and the instability of their currencies. So what do? If you are middle class I remember seeing this in Mexico 15 years ago. If you were middle class, what would you do? Well, you would buy not one car, maybe you'd buy a car and a truck, or you would buy all sorts of little assets, extra furniture. And I remember saying to somebody, like, just buy one. They can, no, because if anything happens to the peso, then I have things I can sell and barter. And that is very difficult for people in the West to understand that mindset, but that is prevalent in Latin America. So you add that to the lowest class of people who also they don't have a method of savings. That's why they're perpetually poor. Well, now they can have a bank in their phone, and it doesn't matter if they're saving 20,000 pesos or 20 pesos, depending on the country that you're in. They now finally have a savings mechanism, and they don't have to waste it on extra nonsense and barter if they don't have access to cash. And this is my plea to people on the left. This is so important to understand. I know their intentions are mostly good. They want to help people, and they want to help more impoverished people. The right wing is more about systemizations. They want to build systems and somebody has to do it on their own. Okay, fine. But you have a tool there to save people in the developing world and the third world to allow them to build upward mobility. It's Bitcoin. So please embrace it and reach out to people in developed countries and help them absorb it, because that's going to change their lives.
Which brings me to the next topic, and I fully agree with that, of the importance of financial freedom. I thought a lot about that, and I feel like without financial freedom, you cannot have any other freedom, as we've seen with the Freedom Convoy, especially. Like, freedom of speech is great, but if they cut off your bank account and your ability to make your voice heard, it's really hard. Do you agree with like the financial freedom kind of being the foundation to all other freedoms?
I think financial freedom is freedom of speech, and freedom of speech is a prerequisite to having a society that is free broadly. If you don't have freedom of speech, then you'll never have any sort of freedom. So I don't distinguish between the two, financial freedom and freedom of speech. You hear these arguments all the time about free speech. I think one of the problems we deal with in the West right now is, and a lot of people don't understand how this works and the mechanisms behind the scenes, and I get it, so sometimes they get a little upset. But Western countries right now are suffering a very severe degree of political entryism from adversarial actors towards Western countries. And what are they doing? They're using, the freedom of speech in the United States, and they're using financial freedom to weaponize and brainwash large swaths of the population to get them to become what's called okophobic. So xenophobic is you don't like people from the outside. Okophobia is when you hate your own culture. And they're trying to fuel that sentiment. And that's why you're seeing the pushback from people who want to become more nationalistic, right? So that all gets very complex and messy. So that's the complication that we have to navigate around in terms of financial freedom. Like, if for me, if we lived in a perfect world and I was the omnipotent ruler of the world, what I would say is all NGOs and government institutions need to use they need to use Bitcoin on a ledger, and that needs to be publicly available for everyone. So there's two sides of this trade, I guess is the way to describe it. And we'll take freedom of speech / financial freedom as the example. Free speech is for the individual. It's not for the government. It's for the individual person. So on the other side of that trade is, and along with freedom of speech, I would pair the presumption of innocence. So the free speech and the presumption of innocence is to the individual. But the presumption, what's the opposite of that trade? It's the presumption of guilt. And if we don't see full transparency from government institutions, then I think by default, they need to be presumed guilty of whatever they're accused of, right? Again, that's not for individuals, that's for government infrastructure. And the way to solidify and strengthen the credibility of government institutions is have all their finances on a public ledger, public blockchain like Bitcoin. So that way there's no more, there's no more cloak of ambiguity. People don't know. And people in government hate that because, corruption is human nature, unfortunately. But I think that's an important framing we need to understand. I don't think people outside of the political class, I don't think that's a right or left wing issue. I think that's just a individual issue versus the mechanics of corruption within politics. But yeah, I'm sure people will argue with me on that.
It's super interesting because the one thing I thought about now is how you observed Elon Musk coming into the government and this whole thing with Donald Trump, because I think some people say Donald Trump is an outsider to politics, but he has been in office, he has been in politics. I don't know how much outsider he is, but Elon Musk, you could actually argue he's a true outsider. I mean, who is a true outsider to politics? Probably nobody, but he's a very unconventional politician. Let's say it like that. How did you observe the whole thing where he kind of tried to make big things, and then when he saw that it's not that easy, he just went out? And there's a whole thing with the blue eye and all the things, but just the things that we have observed, how do you look at that?
He experienced what I and other more entrepreneurial-minded people experienced in politics. It's the reason I had lots of opportunities in politics. They could have carved out ridings for me. If I played the games and just lied the way they wanted me to lie to make the lobbyists happy, yeah, I could have been part of that. But I have no interest in lying to people. And, that's not the entrepreneurial framework of the world. So what he experienced, I believe, is exactly what the rest of us in that framing experienced. We went in and we thought government and these institutions are about practical solutions. And this is why there was so much pushback for Trump as well, because you can see Trump, like him or hate him, is more of a pragmatic framing. That's why he changes his mind. That is not tolerated in government. No. It is very, very tribal because there's all sorts of incentive mechanisms and alliances that people don't see and don't know that's going on behind the scenes. And so many deals that are brokered over long periods of time. And that has to do with campaign financing or their exit strategy from politics. So it gets very complicated and murky. And I think what Elon did is he got in with, I don't want to say naive. I think he understood, at that point he understood, largely how government works. I think what his mistake was understanding that those people would change and work alongside with him. And, the catalyst moment I saw, and listen, I like Trump on a lot of things. There's a few things I disagree with. I think he's more of a necessary outcome right now. Not evil, but a necessary outcome, given how far we've gone on politics. And I had a lot of sympathy for Elon when he decided to get involved, I think for positive motivations, for good reasons. We saw him tweet out during the trucker convoy, Canadians truckers rule. And I've told the story about a mysterious donation from a user named liar.com. And that domain was registered to somebody by the name of Elon Musk. So I think this trucker convoy got a lot of people who just didn't care and wanted to avoid politics. It just forced them to start paying attention. And so, like every other discipline, he thinks, well, I'm going to get involved and I'm going to help change it. But there's the human nature factor. And, when I give him a lot of credit. I know the libertarians don't like him because of, how he made his money. I get that, but let's get beyond that. And let's say he got involved, he created Doge, which is an unfortunate name, especially since that, coin, but I wish he would drop it. But he got involved, and he understood that we need to cut the government. He said to Vivek Ramaswamy very famously, no, it doesn't need to be cut by 75%. It needs to be cut by 80% at least, at the very least. And so he put all this effort and emotional energy and time away from his work to get involved and to go the direction of Javier Milei and try to bring that school of thought into the U.S. government. And what sacrifice did he make? Well, they started burning his business. They started burning his dealerships and his inventory. And then all those senior protesters, those hired senior protesters that were largely recruited, I believe, from crowds for hire. Senior citizens, they have nothing to do with their lives and they're bored. They don't like Trump, so I'll go make $100 and call them names. And so they started, they took all the goodwill around Tesla that he built over the years, green energy, all these things that the left is supposed to like. And in 7 days, they were able to brainwash people into burning the dealerships. Like, that's how easily we can be influenced and persuaded if the tactics are strong enough. So he put a target on himself and on his business, and you saw his investors were very frustrated. And then Trump comes out and makes an announcement. We have the largest defense budget in human history, $1 trillion defense budget. It's like, oh my God, Elon is not going to take this well. Because in my opinion, again, I like Trump on a lot of things, but you stabbed Elon in the heart completely. And I can sympathize why Elon reacted the way he did. He says, look, I just sacrificed my entire business for the good of the country, and now you've just undone all of the work that we've been able to accomplish so far. And I think Trump knows it. I think that's one of the reasons he was, usually when people turn on Trump, he starts calling them names. But if you notice, he was soft on Elon, and you could see he was one of the few times I saw him, you could see him just gently put his head down a little bit of that shame in there. I could be wrong, but that's how I read it. That's how I read it. And so I'm very sympathetic to Elon in that aspect. And that is how politics is. That's why I step away from it, because for me, loyalty is everything. And loyalty is very difficult. It's very hard. And I think Trump knew he made that mistake. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also interesting because I think Elon Musk had a lot of this frame of reference from getting into companies, like with Twitter and all of those things. So I think he knew that it was very different in a nation state and all those things. But it's just so interesting to see that world colliding of an Elon Musk, and I think he's doing great things. Like I'm a big fan of his, and then seeing him colliding with Donald Trump and seeing that whole development going forward. That was fun for me to to watch, but I think it was not as fun for Elon, who put a lot of money and a lot of his business online, and then kind of getting frustrated with how things don't progress. Maybe even made a step back with the big beautiful bill.
Well, and the big beautiful bill had some things that Trump was desperate to get in, and he knew, when you're elected president your first term, you only have one shot to get all your stuff. If you start doing multiple bills to Congress, then it's going to be kicked down the road and you'll get, very little passed. So that's why he tried to do it in one bill. And there was a lot of negotiations and stuff put in there that I'm sure Trump himself did not like, but he had to negotiate things in to get bigger things in. And that's how politics is. But it was such a shame. Because I think over time, I think you're seeing this amongst more liberal people, like my more liberal friends are now starting to see what actually has been transpiring for the last decade, and they're getting curious, and they're asking, okay, I thought you were completely wrong, but maybe you weren't. Explain things to me. And what a missed opportunity as a result of their falling out, which I'm sure they're making amends or have made amends to some degree. When Musk was in the Oval Office with his kid, X, on his shoulders, and him and Trump were doing almost a collaborative, off-the-cuff press conference. And, the people are being radicalized into all sides, but I think people who maybe are liked Musk or liked Trump or were at least amicable to listening to them, I thought, what an amazing historical moment in the United States history, that I think people will realize the implication of that in 25 years, that was a major moment that the media tried to trash and tarnish, of them just having a practical conversation of like, listen, remember the people can't retire because the files are hard copied in a mine. The bottleneck is the elevator going down to the mine. And, you saw two people who, by the way, were Democrats all their lives. So we're not talking about radical ideologues saying like, hey, listen, this is what a mess government has become. And I think what they're trying to infer is it's not because people in government are evil. It's just because everything is band-aided together, and civil servants often, they have a ceiling and really strict guardrails of what they can do and change. And this is the result of having a system where there's limited creativity and limited room for growth and innovation. You end up with an elevator shaft for paper files. And that's all they're communicating. Say, hey, we're going to turn the corner, and we're trying to, build a brighter, more technologically minded future. And yeah, there's trade-offs for everything. But I wish the essence of that moment was better captured. And I wish they had figured out how to, this is no offense to either of them, drop their egos a little bit and just focus on, what their commonalities are and build upon that moment, because that was an amazing moment, at least for me.
Amazing. I did not know that Donald Trump was also a Democrat before. I knew about Elon Musk. He was a Democrat before. I wasn't aware that Donald Trump also was a Democrat, man.
Yeah, he was a New York City Democrat his entire life. And this is why before when he was on the campaign trail, I think he was running for the primary. He was on that program in the U.S., The View, with Whoopi Goldberg's, the ones who've been calling him a racist Nazi. He was on before he got the nomination. They loved him because they all knew each other, because they were all friends for decades. I think people in Europe have somewhat of an understanding of Donald Trump's popularity in the New York scene. He was massively popular. That's why he was on Howard Stern all the time. Howard Stern, who calls him names, he was a regular guest. That's how I knew he wasn't crazy. He wasn't a Nazi. He always had somewhat practical ideas. If you could sift through the ego and self-congratulatory statements, you'd realize it's just a business guy looking for practical solutions. Did he screw people in business deals? Sure, I'm sure he has. I've been screwed many times. Everybody's been screwed and dealt with people who were, deceptive or viewed your agreement differently, and it sucks. But so they loved him. They revered him. They kept saying, Donald, we love you. We've known you for years, but you're not going to win. You're not going to win. And he's like, I'm going to try. We'll see what happens. I think I got a chance. And they just, once he put he got the seal of the Republican identity behind him, then all of a sudden it was vicious public shaming and smear campaigns, never ending, trying to brainwash people. And that's what's led to TDS. I knew there was a problem where I got very worried, and some other commentators have talked about it who noticed this as well. If you remember, Hillary Clinton wasn't doing very well against Donald Trump. He was actually leading her in the early days after his nomination. And because, again, like Barack Obama said, America is a country where anybody can have the opportunity to become rich and famous like Donald Trump. Those were Barack Obama's words in the past. And you saw how that shift into the brainwashing, where did it come from? Well, Hillary, I remember reading it somewhere, that Robert Cialdini and a team of 4 other psychologists, PhD professors, psychologists, joined the Hillary Clinton campaign. And I thought, uh-oh, that's not good. If you know who Robert Cialdini is and how much he changed marketing and public relations communications, some people call him Godzilla of that sphere. Like, he's really brilliant. And he understands what are the words that persuade and influence people, the individual word selection. And that's where you got TDS. TDS came from Cialdini and that team, in my opinion. And it's unfortunate because that's what started the echo chambers of extremism, that all of a sudden through this process, you saw the suspension of critical thinking, and people would just react to stimulus of hearing the word Trump. They would just, Hitler. That is completely programmed and intentional. And I wish that hadn't happened, because the world would have been a much more, I don't want to say civil, because the world is still quite civil, but it would have been a much more politically amicable place where we could have been speaking to one another. But again, that's what Bitcoin seems to be solving, because I have friends in Bitcoin who are completely on the opposite end, but we're friends and we help each other, we talk to each other, and that's it. And it doesn't become the focal point of our conversations.
I love it. Bitcoin is a great unifier. I have one question that I ask each and every one of my guests. So today we talked a lot more outside of Bitcoin, but I will still ask you the question. Maybe there's something else coming up. And the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
That might be the topic of my next book. I have something laid out, and I'm working on something that might take a couple of years. And that is people's level of understanding of how the world actually works. And this one example I'll give is, which I've alluded to before, that is, politicians aren't necessarily people elected to office, right? There are people who spend their life in politics, are politicians, and never ran for an office, but they're appointed to positions, they're advisors, they're fixers, whatever. Most of them, there's always a fringe exception for everything. Most of them are not motivated by control. They are, or should I say, they're not seeking control. They are in a state of fear. That's kind of how they're pushed in different directions. So I know, we always talk about these very wealthy people around the world who control the world. It's not that. I've met some of the wealthiest people in the world. They're not fueled by wanting to control you or I. That's what we get completely wrong. Oh, they just want to control us. No, they are paranoid. Paranoid with fear right now. And I don't mean irrationally paranoid. Rationally paranoid, if there's such a thing. That the system of the world is going to collapse and they don't know what to do. That's why they give, it doesn't matter left or right, whatever. That's why so many of these people are giving money to NGOs, giving money to think tanks and whatever, solve this problem because they don't want to see people go to the extremes. There are some political people who want to do that when it's election time. But the truly wealthy people in the world, like Elon Musk is one of the wealthiest, one of the wealthiest people in the world. He doesn't want to control you. He doesn't want the world to collapse. They're all like that. And I think if we stop demonizing, and I think this comes from Marxism, there's the 1% versus the rest of us. No, the 1% have more to lose. That's why they're more fearful. And they're just trying to figure out things out just like we are. And I think people saw the world for their framing. They would understand. I'm going to give another example. I was in Miami many years ago. A friend of mine's got a super, super wealthy client that he had to go see, and we were together. He said, yeah, come with us and we'll hang out and whatever. Okay, fine. So we went to a place in Miami called Seyr, which is a beautiful hotel and bar and whatever. And we're in the back, and this guy was super wealthy. And it was in 2008, so right in the middle of the GFC in Florida. And this guy has property all over the world, billions and billions of dollars worth of property. And he was extremely stressed, and that came up in conversation. We're talking about the economy. And my friend said, what are you so worried about? Like he said, I don't want to be offensive, but you're not like the rest of us trying to figure out how to pay the bills. And he said, oh yeah, really? I'm writing he said, I can handle, I can't remember the numbers he said, but just for argument's sake, he said, I can handle a 20% vacancy rate on my properties. I can't handle a 60% vacancy rate. And right now I'm writing a check if I remember correctly, he said, I'm writing a check every month for $30 million. Just to cover my losses. How long do you think I can handle that till I still have to start selling properties in a market where they've all collapsed? He said, we all have the same problems. The difference is the numbers are bigger. He said, but I have more liability. If you go bankrupt, you're going to go to bankruptcy court, you're going to work out a deal and whatever. If I go bankrupt, I'm going to jail. Because they're going to try to pin me with some sort of fraud or some sort of moving capital or whatever, just because I have a very complex business structure all over the world. So we're all facing the same things together. The 1% versus 99%, that is a myth. We are all struggling to make it through. And there are some exceptions of bad people. I'm not talking about the corner cases, just people broadly. I think we'll do ourselves much better service and gain credibility amongst people outside the Bitcoin community if they know we understand that people aren't all inherently evil, that we're all just trying to figure it out, and some people are more ambitious than others. Okay, that's fine. That in itself is not evil.
I do agree. It's this theme, and I feel like it is more even in Europe. I'm probably maybe in Canada the same. I don't know how the dynamics are, but in Europe, if you are for Elon or even worse for Trump, you get labels on yourself just because you're like, oh yeah, like I do like what he does with SpaceX. It's a really interesting company what he does with Tesla. And you're like, they are demonizing not only the person but all the persons associated with them, even if you just say, oh, I like what he's doing there. And that's I think it's very bad to split people, like to split society in half or in three pieces or whatever. So I do hope that kind of the middle kind of gets split on more and more of the corners. I see that a lot, and then it's not something that I like.
Well, I think the middle can be the glue that brings people together. And the middle needs to do its job to reach out to other sides and talk to people they disagree with to say, let's focus on what we agree on, which is why Bitcoin is so powerful.
That's a great way, and not to end it because we have one more end routine before we get ended. The end routine is where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the previous guest asked you the question: what do you think is the biggest threat to Bitcoin that you currently see?
I think it's the same thing that it's always been, which is human nature. So it's why didn't I or other people buy more Bitcoin when we discovered it? It took me about a year or so to really understand, even though I understood technically, to understand and accept the philosophical implications of Bitcoin and what it could lend to the world. And once I did, then I realized, wow, this is the thing that can solve all the problems I've been learning about in terms of monetary policy my whole life. But are humans rational and practical? I don't think so. I think we are more emotional. And I think if we allow, Steven Pinker talks in his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, if we allow the demons to get a hold of us and cause us to become increasingly more irrational and emotive negatively, and we are turned on Bitcoin and on ourselves and on our individual freedoms, then that could pose a problem. So I don't think the threat to Bitcoin is the protocol, the technology. Quantum computing, I think, is way, way in the future, and it might not even be a threat to Bitcoin. I don't think it's any of that. I think it's just human nature. And the other thing is, this is linked to human nature, our inability to, not our inability to communicate, but some of the missteps that we make with communication. One of the things I talk with a friend of mine who's a very strong Bitcoiner, he gets frustrated with the Bitcoin community because they don't like credit. They want to have a Bitcoin world only without credit and lending. And I agree with him on this case, maybe because I've had a small business. And when you have a small business, you always have some sort of fire to put out. And your business are often seasonable. And God forbid you're in your dead season and all of your equipment, or maybe your biggest piece of equipment, dies and needs to be replaced instantly. And you don't have the money liquid in your account for the down payment on your next lease, then your business is done. So we need credit creation. And the idea that we won't have we can live in a world without credit creation, I think that's crazy, just as a small business person. And this is why I'm kind of a proponent. I know people don't like the fiat mindset, and I understand that. I think there's a combination of the two. I don't see fiat as a threat to Bitcoin, obviously. And I think Bitcoin is going to have many opportunities for people, and we can get into that another time. But I also understand that the fiat system for credit creation and small businesses before government has changed lives over the past 100 years. And so I think there's a yin and yang between Bitcoin and the corrupted fiat system right now that I think can be fixed. And I think that's what everybody's trying to figure out. How do we fix the current system, and how can Bitcoin be a part of it to strengthen the current system while still having these opportunities for small businesses through credit creation, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think credit in itself is not bad. It's the central banking and the fiat system that I think most Bitcoiners have something. But honestly, I think it's great to have credit, peer-to-peer credit. If we have something like lending money, it has been before, before central banking. Like there's a tool that we anyways use. This is something very natural to banking, and I do agree. I think the biggest threat to Bitcoin is human nature. If we fight too much on what solution we implement for quantum computers, it might be a problem. But we will get to solutions to that problem. Human nature is probably and human behaviors is the bigger problem. And yeah, thank you so much, Benjamin, for being on. Before I let you go, where can people find you, find your book, find the things you're doing?
Don't I get to ask a question for the next guest?
You get, but I usually give the people the opportunity to think about that. But if you have it already, you can ask it already.
Okay. I don't know who your next guest is, but let me try how to word this correctly. Is your audience mainly, or your guests mainly European? Or, well, it doesn't really matter. Why are Europeans so blind to the threats that are right in front of them, tearing their culture apart? Why do Europeans fail to acknowledge that importing cultures with alien values will not end up in the destruction of Europe? Why won't they listen?
I love that question. As a European myself, but most of my guests are actually not European.
Okay, we'll ask them anyways. It's fine.
I'll ask them anyways. Maybe it's a European. Let's see. Then yeah, thank you so much, BJ, for being on. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today, as always. Oh no, wait, I forgot where they can find you. Do you have like a Twitter or anything where people should reach out to you?
Yeah, Substack, X, and there's a website for my book, so you can buy my book. Christmas is going to be coming soon. Honkingforfreedom.com, and you can see a bunch of my interviews from that period there. And you can find me on Substack, bjdichter.substack.com. A number of my articles have now been picked up by Zero Hedge, I think 7 or 8 times now. I'm trying to comment on geopolitical stuff on there. So that comes from my Substack initially. And I'm on X and Twitter. Just type in BJ Dichter, just anywhere in the web. You'll find me there. And I do have a YouTube channel that I will be streaming more again after the Labor Day weekend, getting into the fall season. So you can find me there if you want to participate. And you can find the Honking for Freedom. There's a Discord that one of my supporters runs. If you're into Discord, and it doesn't seem too many people are lately, but we'll see.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. And also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening and for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.